Hi, I'm Philip Carr-Gomm, and this is This Magical Life, your guide to the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and wisdom.
Hello, it's Philip Carr-Gomm here. As ever, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you. And I thought I'd share with you. Confessionals always have a certain kind of interest for us, don't they? So I thought I'd do a confessional, confess to you the problem that I've set up for myself with these tea sessions, and I think in thinking about it, it has some interesting kind of repercussions in looking at the spiritual life and how we live our lives generally. So it's not just me talking about myself. What I've set up with these things is, of course, Monday morning, I think, what shall I talk about? And what then happens is a moment of crisis, a moment of, oh my God, and my mind goes completely blank and I can't think of anything to share with you. What I then do is I go for a walk or go for a swim or sit quietly and go into meditation. And somehow an idea percolates up. And there's a particular process that I use, which I use in its extreme this morning, because this morning I had an extreme sense of having nothing to share with you. And so I decided what I do is I completely accept the feelings I'm having and just be completely open. So I sensed this sort of sense almost of panic. And I thought, gosh. So I imagined myself sitting here having a kind of panic and not having anything to say. And as I imagined myself doing this, immediately bubbled up, rather like these little bubbles that are coming up the screen here. What immediately bubbled up was the topic for this evening, which is the relationship between spontaneity and planning. Because the challenge for me is always, do I plan what I'm going to say? Do I really think about it? Sometimes write it out, and I do sometimes. The idea comes to me in the morning and I write the blog posts. If you've ever seen one of the blog posts that go with these talks, they can be quite detailed because I've actually thought it through, typed it all up, given some references to other links or whatever. And that's the inspiration for the evening. And then by the evening, it's kind of in my head and I can talk to you about it. But I don't always do that. Sometimes I just get the idea and I sort of know, I suppose it's intuition, I don't know, or foolishness. I feel, no, don't actually write it all out and plan it. Leave it open, allow for some spontaneity, because then new stuff can come in and perhaps ideas will occur to you that won't have occurred before. So, okay, so that's how I do these evening sessions. Sometimes I plan them, sometimes they're more or less spontaneous. And so the question then becomes, well, is this relevant outside of you telling us about how you plan these tea sessions? Well, I think it is, because I think it works in how we live our lives, really. If you think, let's transfer it to our social lives. You know, the way you can plan a social event, and sometimes you can over-plan it. You have an idea for a party or something like that, and you are so fixated on the result. It's got to be fantastic. It's got to be wonderful. You kind of over-plan it, and then when it happens, maybe it isn't as great as you thought it would be. Maybe it isn't. But there are ways in which the opposite can occur, where you have a spontaneous. You suddenly think, "Hey, I'd like to meet some friends." You pick up the phone, and you meet up with some people. And that can be fantastic as well. But again, that can go wrong because you invite everybody over and then you open the fridge and there's nothing in it. So you've got nothing to give them. So in the end, a bit of planning and a bit of spontaneity is the sort of obvious way, the sort of the middle way between the two. And I've been applying, I think for me, to have a kind of experimental attitude towards life, to allow oneself to make mistakes is terribly important. When I first started giving talks about spirituality, I was completely spontaneous. So for years, I would make no notes. I would simply tune in and then speak. And then after about 4 or 5 years, I had a couple of experiences of literally my mind going a complete blank, and the intense embarrassment of having an audience of 100 people sitting in front of me and not being able to speak. Hugely horrible at the time, but hugely helpful in the end. So I think if one can really allow oneself to experiment, and perhaps it wasn't fair in that case for all the people who were listening, but if one can allow oneself to experiment with spontaneity versus planning, it can help hugely. If you're a writer, and here let's look at it. We've looked at it in the sort of social context of how being spontaneous socially can be great, but sometimes you need to do some planning so you've got enough beer in the fridge or whatever it is. And how about creativity? And that's what kind of settled it for me, this tension between spontaneity and planning. The very first book I wrote, I decided to do it completely spontaneously. I had an idea, which I think was a good idea, and every day I would just tune in and write a kind of stream of consciousness book. And I wrote about half of a book. And it was in the time of the very first Macs, which, believe it or not, just had floppies. They didn't have hard drives. And one day I didn't copy it. I was just writing it in the computer, thinking it was new technology. And one day a message came up on the screen saying, "This disk is unreadable. Do you want to initialize it?" And I thought, initials? Yeah, it sounds like embroidering initials on a handkerchief. Yes, why not? Put my initials on. Go ahead. So I pressed the button. There was bzz, 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 and that was the sound of my book being wiped off the floppy disk. But looking back, it was a good thing because the book was actually a mess. In fact, only one tiny bit of the book remained, which is in a book I wrote called The Druid Way, about the goddess and the long man of Wilmington. But all the rest was lost forever. And it was a good thing because there was no planning at all. So there was just Arwen with no planning. Last summer, I got involved in a huge project, which I eventually pulled out of, called DAU, which is an example of a project where there's so much creativity and so much money and so many resources put into it. It's just spilling out all over the place. And what I've learned in writing is that I need, and I think we all need in creative pursuits, a combination of structure and spontaneity. So with a book, for instance, I'll create a structure for it in my mind, or a course even, whatever, and then start to work with that, always open to changing it and to allowing the Arwen to flow and to bringing in something new. But at least there's a structure, at least my gift of my whatever it is, gift, my talent, my ability, that's the best word, my ability doesn't just run amok. This applies to the spiritual life as well when we think about doing ceremonies. If you think about a kind of perennial problem, I think a lot of us have in paganism or in druidry or in ritual in general, is the question of to plan or not to plan. And I'm sure for those of you who've done the seasonal ceremonies, you'll have had times when you've become frustrated by standing in a circle with everybody reading their scripts. And you're thinking, oh God, can't we have some spontaneity in this? Can't it? This isn't my idea of a sort of sacred ceremony. So, but have you ever tried doing it without any sense of structure? Now, again, sometimes it does work, very occasionally, and usually it's with a small amount of people, or perhaps when you're on your own. If you decide you want to do a ceremony in the forest, or there's just you and your partner and you want to celebrate Imbolc together at sunrise or whatever it is, being spontaneous has a greater chance, I think, than those times when you gather 20 people together and say, let's do a spontaneous ritual. It can be really quite ragged. I've experimented with this, and it's really hard because when a ritual is over planned, it can feel dry and lifeless. And when it's overly spontaneous, it can feel, quite frankly, chaotic, because you're kind of waiting for the next person to say something. Maybe you feel inspired to say something. Those circles, those sharing circles in a ritual, friends, where somebody will say a prayer or something, and then people would be invited to say things, and then shy people don't say anything, and then there's a pause. And when it flows, it's beautiful. But when it doesn't flow, it's just embarrassing because you're standing there thinking, should I say something? Shouldn't I? Oh, wait a minute, is he going to say something? It doesn't work. So it seems to me something which is, I suppose, obvious, but the obvious is sometimes worth stating, is that as human beings, we need structure and we need freedom. And so what a spiritual tradition offers is it offers a structure. So in Druidry, for instance, we say, look, there are 8 festivals during the year, and these are the guiding ideas behind the festivals. These are the topics that you might like to focus on. And there's a particular way that we can begin a ceremony. There's a particular way we can end it. And the various ritual gestures and phrases and acts. But within that, feel free to be spontaneous. Feel free to allow your own unique individuality to come into this. And when I was in New Zealand, we had a fantastic bardic circle in which the topic we explored was tradition versus innovation. And I think I talked about this at last week's tea, about how somebody had come up with this idea of, based on the tradition we have of saying in Druid ceremonies, we swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. And that's a lovely traditional phrase that we use. So that's tradition. And then somebody came up with an innovation, with a spontaneous kind of innovation, which is for everybody to stand like this. And then one by one, you say, so you get, I swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. And then I move my hand and I hold the next person's hand. And then they move their hand and they say it. And in a small circle, it's very beautiful, each person saying it, each person contributing. So I think that, for me, that was a lovely example of how planning, structure, tradition offers us a container, and then into that container can come some inspiration and some innovation. When you're a perfectionist, you don't want to get it wrong. So the danger of being a perfectionist is that you can overplan. And I don't know what's the opposite of a perfectionist? People who don't make any effort at all, and then things can go just a mess. Let's apply this understanding now to our meditation. So we're going to do a meditation now, which, if you've been in these teas, you'll know what they're like. They're basically around 10 minutes. They have a structure. We'll look at the structure. They have a structure of around 10 minutes. They are set in the sacred grove, a clearing in the forest, which I just suggest, but I also give you the option to, if you don't like to be in a clearing in the forest, you can imagine standing by the sea or being in an open meadow. It's on top of a mountain. It's up to you. But a sacred grove, the reason why we like it as Druids is because A, it affirms our love of the forest and our love of the trees, and B, it actually creates that containment. A grove is a clearing, often envisaged as kind of circular, roughly circular. It's a clearing in the forest, so it's a containment. So it symbolizes this idea of limitation, containment, structure, tradition, all these things. But then into that, we invite new experiences, spontaneous feelings, and so on. And I suggest tuning into nature, connecting with the earth and the sky and the trees. Again, it's a threefold structure of getting grounded in the earth, connecting with the trees, the sense of being alive, connecting with the senses as well, the smell of the trees, breathing, focusing on breathing, and then the earth above, connecting with the energy of the earth, and then they come down and meet within the center of your being. So that brings a kind of grounding and centering, And then within that, and then I suggest something in the meditation that allows spontaneous feelings and thoughts and inspiration to come through to us. And then we close with the structure again. So that's an example of how the tension or the relationship between structure and spontaneity works. So let's actually put it into practice. Let's do it now. So, okay, so if you're up for this, feel free to keep your eyes open if you want to, or close your eyes to better concentrate on yourself. Take in a deep breath. Let it out. And as you let it out, you can perhaps think of a phrase we use in Druid ceremonies, which is, as we step into a circle, we leave outside all disturbing thoughts. We step into the sacred grove and we sense ourselves seated or standing in the sacred grove, the earth beneath our feet. And we sense the earth, this wonderful living organism, with all its creatures, all its life, the soil, the crystals, the minerals, the water. And we feel grounded and we feel stable. And we let all the tensions of the day just drift away into the earth. And sensing our love for the earth, sensing being stabilized and in harmony with the earth, we become aware now of the trees around us. We sense the trees rooted deep in the earth, their roots stretching down into the earth, bringing a sense of stability and calm. We sense their trunks rising up, their branches and their leaves, and we breathe in the oxygen they are creating, breathing in their perfume, the essential oils that the leaves excrete. We breathe in the perfume and the air of the trees. We sense them as our brothers and sisters. We feel their protection and their power. And then we become aware of the sky above us. And we breathe in the energy of the sky, allowing the energy of the sky to meet the energy of the earth within the center of our beings. And we open now to the wonder, the special magic of being seated together in this clearing. Friends from all over the world are seated by trees too. There's this sense of connection here, but also openness. And feel free now just to tune in to the aspect of this grove that calls to you at this moment, whether it's the earth, the sky, the trees, the circle of people in the grove. Perhaps you sense a fire burning in the center of the circle. Just tune in, feel drawn to one particular aspect of this grove and be open to the inspiration it brings you. And we'll sit together just enjoying this silence and this moment together for a while before we finish. It's possible that you become aware of a creature, a bird or a creature that comes into the clearing. Or perhaps it's just the sense of peace and of being out in nature that brings inspiration to you. And knowing that you can come back to the sacred grove at any time. Just now sense yourself just placing the palms of your hands on the ground in front of you, so you sense the earth. Sense your love for the earth, for the stillness, for the trees around you, and for the energy of the sky above you. And then looking around in the circle through your inner eyes, you then gradually allow your awareness of the sacred grove to fade as you retain any feelings of well-being or of calm or peace that you experienced. Just allowing the image to gradually fade in your mind as you become aware of being seated here in this space that you're in, whether it's sitting in front of your computer or your telephone or your tablet. And I hope you enjoyed that. I'm just looking at some of the comments talking about planning and practicing ritual skills allows for freedom of expression and spontaneity. Those of you who've worked in the theatre know that that's why the rehearsal is so important. Life is not structured, it is spontaneous. Well, it depends exactly what you mean, but actually there is structure. I think look at the wonderful structures of DNA. Structure is something that exists within life, but maybe you meant something slightly different. So I think there's the structure and the spontaneity. How does this spontaneity work within larger ceremonies? It's a huge challenge. You know, these big camps that we go to. Let me give you an example of that. It's a very interesting question. People who put on big ceremonies, say at Druid camps, for instance, where you've got maybe 100 people. It's a big challenge. So I've been in New Zealand recently, and there were about 80 of us. And there we opened with a Maori, traditional Maori structure, which is called a pōwhiri, which is a greeting and a welcome. So it's very structured in the sense of the visitors stand on one side. So those of us who'd come from England and so on were on one side. And the people from New Zealand of the land were there. And then the ancestors are called in. We approach we would approach the people seated there and then be welcomed. We would sit down, and then somebody would stand up and give a speech that was thought of beforehand, but had the spontaneity in it. It wasn't scripted, spontaneous and beautiful. And then I was invited to stand up and speak, and so was Elke from Australia and so on. And so it was structured, but within that, we were free to say whatever we liked. And Ema sang a beautiful song, which we're going to put up on the internet, that she had composed the night before. You learn how to do things, you know, that you develop the technique first, and then you allow yourself to fly. I think that's the thing. But I think in a big ceremony, I think that if you were organizing, say, a ceremony of 80 people, and you tried to go for total spontaneity, it would be a mess, in my experience. You would have to create a structure. And in a way, that's the value in using the same structure. That's why in OBOD, for instance, we have fairly standard opening and closings of ceremonies. It means that as you work with it over the years, you know what to do. And then you can feel free within that to bring in some of your own embellishments and so on, but you know the structure. writer's block? Well, I don't know. That's interesting, isn't it? Thinking about I think perhaps it's when you get caught between these two stools of, maybe you plan too much and that dries you up. You try swinging to the other way and being completely spontaneous, but you're not getting the flow. And Tchaikovsky said, we have to meet inspiration halfway, which I think is very, very true. Like if you, that you have to make some effort, set up your computer and then turn up at the desk, even though you don't feel like writing, start to try to write. You've got to make the effort. I've also tried, if you've got the time, try this. Try writing a book with no pressure, no deadline, and only write when you feel moved to write. To begin with, it's incredibly liberating. You say, oh my God, this is fantastic. I will, you become the poet in the attic. I will only write when the muse visits me. And it may work to begin with. You may find yourself feeling so free and so, inspired and all the rest of it. But I think you will be a rare bird if you keep going like that, because I don't think it works like that. The muse will sit back in her armchair in the sky and will wait for you to come to her and to do a bit of work to come to her. So I think we have to meet the muse halfway. We have to work with some kind of structure. So thank you so much for coming along, and it's been lovely talking with you. So many, many blessings, lots of love. Bye.
Looking to deepen your spiritual practice? Visit philipcargomm.com for courses, meditations, and transformative tools.